In 1986, researchers ventured into a cabin built in 1847 on a frigid Wisconsin winter night to take measurements. The temperature outside was a bone-chilling -38 degrees Fahrenheit. Music. Inside, fueled by only a small fire, it was a relatively balmy 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Keep in mind, this structure had no insulation, no furnace, and certainly no backup system. Contrast this with your modern home, which would quickly become uninhabitable after just 12 hours without power. Between 1300 and 1700, Europe was gripped by a deep freeze known as the Little Ice Age, a period that claimed millions of lives. The Great Famine of 1315 alone wiped out an estimated 12% of the population. Rivers transformed into frozen highways, and glaciers relentlessly crushed entire villages. Yet, remarkably, peasant homes from that era are still standing today. Over 3,000 of these dwellings, some 700 years old, remain occupied and fully functional. These homes benefited from 3 interconnected systems working in harmony, a feat that modern engineering, even with limitless resources, struggles to replicate. Today, I'm going to guide you through these 3 crucial elements: music, the structures that breathed, the once-a-day heating method, and the versatile substance they transformed into 8 distinct survival tools. This is what sustained millions during centuries of temperatures that would be lethal in a matter of hours. Their solution was remarkably simple: elevate the house off the ground. Instead of directly embedding the main load-bearing posts into the earth, where they would inevitably rot, they rested them on foundational cushions of stone. These padstones, often just large, flat rocks, distributed the weight of the timber frame while keeping the vulnerable end grain of the wood away from moisture. Excavations of medieval sites consistently reveal these stone foundations, some showing evidence of multiple rebuilds over the centuries. This wasn't solely about preventing rot. It was a form of passive thermal engineering, a principle that modern green building practices have rediscovered. By minimizing direct contact with the ground, they effectively reduced thermal bridging, the process by which cold is conducted from the ground into the structure. Think of it this way: a stone castle is essentially a giant rock sitting in the cold earth, constantly drawing warmth from the interior. In contrast, a peasant's timber-framed house, perched on its stone footings, was thermally decoupled from the ground. Laboratory analysis of surviving medieval structures has demonstrated that this elevation technique could improve interior temperatures by 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit compared to structures in direct ground contact. The cruck frame. If the foundation was the anchor, the timber frame was the skeleton. And in many of the most resilient houses, this skeleton employed one of the most elegant and efficient structural systems in architectural history: the cruck frame. Recent dendrochronological analysis has identified over 3,860 surviving cruck-framed buildings across England, dating from the 1260s to the 1550s, a testament to both their durability and prevalence. A cruck frame is a marvel of resourcefulness. Instead of constructing a rectangular box, builders sought out trees with a natural, gentle curve. They would then split a single curved trunk down the middle, creating 2 symmetrical blades. These were raised and joined at the peak, forming a perfect A-frame. A series of these, connected by horizontal timbers, formed the entire core of the building. The ingenuity of this system becomes apparent when you analyze its material requirements. Detailed studies of surviving examples indicate that a typical peasant house required approximately 111 trees for construction, including 8 large oak cruck blades from mature trees over 24 inches in diameter, plus dozens of smaller trees for studs, rafters, and interior elements. Compare this to the heavy box-framed houses used by the nobility, which could require over 332 trees for a structure of similar size. Peasants, with their limited access to timber, had developed a system that achieved superior structural performance with a fraction of the materials. The structural efficiency is remarkable. In a cruck frame, the load from the roof is transferred directly down the curved blades all the way to the foundation. This means the exterior walls are not load-bearing. They are simply infill panels, acting as curtains against the weather. This design flexibility allowed for easier maintenance and modification, crucial advantages when dealing with the unpredictable stresses of the Little Ice Age climate. The A-frame geometry is inherently stable and flexible, providing resilience during the ferocious winds and heavy snows of the Little Ice Age. This was a significant advantage. Engineering analysis shows that the curved crux could flex under extreme loads without breaking, distributing stress along their entire length. Modern structural engineers recognize this as a principle now used in earthquake-resistant buildings. The medieval peasant had mastered it 7 centuries earlier, not through calculation, but through generations of observation and refinement. Wattle and daub. With the skeleton in place, the next challenge was to skin the walls. The common image is mud walls, but the reality was a sophisticated composite material known as wattle and daub. Recent scientific analysis of surviving panels reveals a level of material sophistication that rivals modern construction techniques. The process began with the wattle, a woven lattice of thin, flexible wood branches set between the main timbers. Archaeological evidence suggests that these were typically hazel, willow, or cleft oak, chosen for their flexibility and resistance to decay. The weaving pattern varied by region, but analysis shows it was engineered to create maximum surface area for the daub to adhere to while maintaining structural integrity. The daub itself was the secret sauce, and laboratory analysis has revealed its true complexity. It was a carefully calibrated mix of clay for adhesion and thermal mass, sand to reduce cracking, a binding agent like straw or animal hair for tensile strength, and often animal manure. The manure wasn't just expedient, it was functional. The undigested fibers added to the wall's insulation and binding strength, while the ammonia may have acted as a preservative against insects and fungal growth. Thermal testing of wattle and daub panels from surviving medieval buildings demonstrates remarkable insulation properties. The thousands of tiny air pockets and the sheer thermal mass of the wall absorbed heat slowly from interior fires and radiated it back at night, moderating the internal temperature. Measurements show that a properly constructed wattle and daub wall could maintain interior temperatures 8 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than exterior conditions with minimal heating. The breathability of the system was equally crucial. Unlike modern walls sealed in plastic vapor barriers, wattle and daub is naturally vapor permeable. It allows moisture to pass through naturally, acting like a wick that draws moisture away from the structural timbers and allows it to evaporate. This moisture management is a fundamental reason why these 700-year-old frames survive today, when many modern timber structures rot within decades. Chemical analysis of daub samples reveals regional variations in composition, suggesting local adaptation and continuous refinement. Some areas added blood as a binder. Others used lime, and coastal regions often incorporated salt-resistant additives. This wasn't primitive trial and error. It was sophisticated materials engineering adapted to local conditions and available resources. The thatched roof. The roof was the final line of defense, and here again, peasants turned a humble material, straw or reeds, into a high-performance system that modern sustainable building practices are rediscovering. A properly constructed thatched roof was a thick, carefully layered blanket, often 18 to 24 inches deep, requiring specialized knowledge and considerable skill to install and maintain. The engineering advantages were immense. First and foremost was insulation. Thatch is one of the best natural insulators available, with thermal properties that exceed many modern materials. Its secret is trapped air. The countless hollow stems create millions of tiny air pockets, providing a massive barrier to heat loss. Thermal imaging of occupied thatched buildings shows that even with roaring fires inside, the exterior surface of the thatch remains near ambient temperature, clear evidence that virtually no heat is being lost through the roof. The layering technique was crucial. Master thatchers developed regional styles that optimized for local climate conditions. The bottom layer, called the eaves course, was laid thick and tight to shed water rapidly. Successive layers were combed and aligned to create a weatherproof surface that could withstand decades of wind and rain. The ridge, where the two roof slopes met, required specialized techniques using twisted straw spars and weighted ligers to prevent wind uplift. Weatherproofing properties were equally impressive. A properly built thatched roof is completely waterproof. Its dense construction and steep pitch, typically 45 to 55 degrees, ensure that driving rains simply cannot penetrate. Archaeological evidence from waterlogged sites shows that well-maintained thatch could last 40 to 60 years before requiring replacement, with regular maintenance extending its life even further. Snow load management was critical during Little Ice Age winters. The steep pitch allowed natural shedding of light snow, while the thick insulation prevented ice dam formation that could damage modern roofing systems. Historical accounts describe thatched roofs supporting snow loads that would collapse modern structures, testament to both the material strength and the framing system beneath. The integrated heating system. At the center of it all was the heating system, and here, medieval peasants developed solutions that modern sustainable heating advocates are rediscovering. The earliest houses featured open hearths, fires lit on clay floors in the middle of the room, with smoke finding its own way out through gaps in the thatch or dedicated smoke holes. To modern sensibilities, this sounds unbearable, but archaeological evidence reveals the sophisticated reasoning behind this approach. The smoke wasn't just tolerated, it was harnessed as a preservation tool. With smoke, rich in chemicals like creosote and other compounds, effectively smoke-cured the entire structure. Analysis of timber from surviving medieval buildings shows penetration of these preservative compounds deep into the wood fibers, killing wood-boring insects and preventing fungal growth. This constant fumigation is a major factor in the incredible longevity of these buildings. Heat management was equally sophisticated. While modern heating systems focus on rapid heat delivery through forced air or radiant systems, the open hearth created a different thermal environment. The fire radiated heat in all directions, warming not just the air but also the thermal mass of the clay floor, the stone hearth, and the surrounding earth. This stored heat was released slowly throughout the night, maintaining more stable temperatures than rapid burn heating systems. The integration of livestock was a masterstroke of thermal engineering. Archaeological evidence from excavated longhouses shows that families and their animals often shared the same roof, separated only by a low partition or screen. A single cow generates approximately 1,500 BTUs per hour of body heat, equivalent to a small space heater running continuously. Multiple animals created a significant heating zone that helped warm the entire structure. Modern analysis shows this arrangement could raise interior temperatures by 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit compared to human occupation alone. Chimney development represented a major technological advancement that spread gradually from the 12th century onward. The addition of a proper chimney and fireplace allowed for more controlled combustion and better smoke removal, but early adopters had to balance the improved air quality against the heat loss through the chimney. Archaeological evidence suggests many peasant houses went through multiple heating system upgrades over their lifespans, adapting to changing fuel availability and technological improvements. The enduring legacy. For centuries, we've pictured medieval peasants living in squalor in flimsy hovels that were a testament to their primitive existence. But the evidence preserved in the blackened oak of a crook blade and the ancient daub of a 700-year-old wall tells a different story. These weren't just huts. They were masterfully engineered structures born from the crucible of the Little Ice Age and refined through generations of adaptation to climate extremes. The thousands of these homes still standing are not a historical anomaly. They are the surviving proof of a lost school of architecture that understood principles modern builders are only rediscovering. These builders were not primitive. They were survival engineers of the highest order, working within constraints that would challenge any modern architect. They understood that a building's true strength isn't always in its mass, but in its ability to flex and adapt. They knew that to stay warm, a house must first be able to breathe. They proved that sophisticated engineering doesn't require complex technology. It requires a deep understanding of materials, climate, and human needs. The medieval peasant house represents more than historical curiosity. It demonstrates that sustainable, resilient design isn't the sole property of the 21st century. The solutions developed by peasant builders during the Little Ice Age, thermal efficiency, material sustainability, structural adaptability, and environmental responsiveness, address challenges that remain relevant today. Climate change, Resource scarcity and the need for resilient communities make these historical lessons increasingly valuable. Archaeological investigation continues to reveal new aspects of medieval building sophistication. Each excavation adds to our understanding of how these structures functioned as complete environmental systems, not just shelters. The integration of heating, ventilation, moisture management, and structural systems in medieval peasant houses represents a holistic approach to building that modern construction is struggling to rediscover. These wattle and daub homes worked across most of Europe, but in Scandinavia, northern Russia, and the Alps, where temperatures hit -40 degrees Fahrenheit for months, peasants needed more. They needed the log cabin, not a vacation retreat, but a thermal fortress that could maintain livable temperatures for 3 days with no fire at all. Modern homes can't do this. Let me show you why theirs could. If this is valuable, hit that like button. It helps more people find this. Section 1. The modern failure. A house of cards against the cold. Walk into any modern home during winter, and you feel the evidence of a fundamental problem. That constant hum of the furnace cycling every 15 minutes, the uneven temperatures. Walk near a window, and you feel that cold draft. Modern construction is built on a flawed premise. We can overcome the cold with brute force. The result is a house completely dependent on continuous energy input. The moment that stops, the house begins its rapid descent toward outside temperatures. The numbers are startling. The average modern American home loses approximately 1 degree Fahrenheit per hour during a power outage when the outside temperature is around freezing. In a severe cold snap at -10 degrees Fahrenheit, that rate doubles. Within 12 hours, a modern home reaches dangerous temperatures. Why? The problem is thermal mass, or rather, the complete lack of it. Modern homes are built with thin materials, 2x6 studs with insulation, half-inch drywall, thin siding. These materials slow heat transfer, but they do not store heat. They have almost no thermal capacity. Think of it like this. Insulation is like a thin windbreaker. It blocks wind, but the moment you stop generating body heat, you get cold fast. Thermal mass is like a thick wool coat warmed by a fire. Even after you step away, that coat keeps radiating warmth for hours. And there is another problem: air infiltration. Despite all the house wrap and vapor barriers, the average new home has the equivalent of a 2-foot x 2-foot hole in the building envelope. Your furnace is not heating your home, it is heating the outdoors. Compare this to surviving medieval log structures in Scandinavia and Russia. During multi-day blizzards at -40 degrees, these cabins maintain livable interior temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees with only a single fire per day. Some stay above freezing for over 72 hours with no fire at all. This is not magic. This is physics applied with brutal efficiency. If you are finding value in this investigation, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us share this forgotten knowledge with more people questioning why modern solutions keep failing us. Section 2. The investigation. Clues from the forest. To understand the medieval log cabin, we start where they started. In the forest. The choice of tree is not random. It is the foundation of everything. In Scandinavia and northern Russia, builders seek out old-growth pine and spruce at least 80 to 100 years old, growing slowly in harsh, cold climates. These trees have incredible density. When dendrochronologists examine timbers from medieval Scandinavian structures, they find rings so tight you can barely see them. Some sections show over 100 rings per inch. Modern plantation timber, just 10 to 20 rings per inch. That density difference is everything. Dense wood has more mass per cubic foot. More mass means more heat storage capacity. A single 12-inch diameter pine log from an old-growth tree weighs over 60 pounds per linear foot. The same size modern lumber, maybe 35 pounds. That extra mass is thermal capacity locked into the walls. But logs alone do not make a warm cabin. The genius is in how they are joined. Medieval builders used scribe-fit joinery. Each log is individually shaped to fit perfectly against the one below it. A single wall might take weeks to fit properly. Why this trouble? Air. If wind can blow through gaps between logs, all the thermal mass in the world will not help. The scribe-fit method creates an almost airtight seal. When researchers test 18th century Norwegian log homes, they find less air leakage than modern homes built to the strictest energy codes. The technique uses compression fit notches, also called shrink to fit. As logs naturally dry and settle over the first few years, the weight above pushes the logs together. The notches are designed to close as logs shrink. What starts with small gaps becomes completely sealed, engineering that works with wood's nature, not against it. After logs are fitted, gaps are chinked with sphagnum moss, clay, and animal hair. Each component has a specific purpose. Sphagnum moss is nature's perfect insulation. Its cellular structure never truly dies. When dried in the wall, cells go dormant but maintain integrity for hundreds of years. The moss remains springy, adjusting as logs move with seasonal changes. Each tiny sphagnum leaf holds 20 times its weight in water when fresh, but when dried, those structures trap thousands of microscopic air pockets. The R value of densely packed sphagnum approaches modern fiberglass. But there is more. Sphagnum is highly acidic, with a pH around 4. Bacteria and fungi that cause rot cannot survive. Insects avoid it. Finnish builders call it sinosol, wall moss. It insulates, seals, flexes with movement, and actively resists decay, all at once. And it is free. The clay creates an airtight seal, while moss provides resilience. Animal hair acts as a binding fiber, like rebar in concrete. This three-part system breathes, allowing moisture vapor to escape, while blocking airflow. Medieval cabins use logs 10, 12, even 16 inches in diameter. This creates thermal lag, the time heat takes to move through a material. A thick wall of dense wood can have a thermal lag of 12 to 24 hours. Even as the outside temperature drops dramatically at night, the inside face of that log wall still radiates warmth it absorbed during the day. The cold does not reach the interior for many hours. By then, you light another fire. The cabin becomes a thermal flywheel. A National Bureau of Standards study from 1980 to 1982 confirms this. Two identical structures, one with 7-inch logs rated R10, another with conventional framing at R12. During winter, both use similar energy, but during spring heating, the log building uses 46% less energy. Thermal mass becomes increasingly valuable as temperatures fluctuate. Section 3. The heating strategy. The medieval log cabin is designed around a single central heating source, the masonry heater. This is not a fireplace. Fireplaces pull massive amounts of heated room air up the chimney. A roaring fire in a traditional fireplace can actually make a room colder. The masonry heater is different. It is a massive structure, often weighing several tons, built from stone or brick. In Russia, they call it a pechka. In Scandinavia, a kekelugn. In Germany, a kachelofen. You build a hot, fast fire once or twice daily, but instead of venting straight up, smoke and hot gases route through a labyrinth of internal channels inside the masonry mass. These channels total 10 to 20 feet in length. As hot gases wind through this maze, they surrender almost all their heat to the stone or brick. By the time smoke exits, it is barely warm. All that heat is now stored in several tons of masonry. That mass radiates warmth gently and evenly for the next 12 to 24 hours. The surface temperature stays around 100 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to feel wonderful, but not dangerous. A proper Russian stove weighs about 2 metric tons for 1,000 pounds of thermal mass. The internal maze of channels is called chinya, meaning knees or bends. The fire brick holds 80% more heat than cast iron, while its heat conductivity is 1/45 that of steel. The brick absorbs heat rapidly, but releases it slowly. An iron stove gets hot and cools fast. A masonry heater maintains warmth for an entire day. Mark Twain, visiting Russia in the 1800s, wrote about these stoves with amazement. A servant burns a small basket of thin pine sticks for 10 to 12 minutes in the morning. The door is then locked. The stove surface is never too hot to touch, yet the room stays warm until past midnight, all from 12 minutes of fire. This is radiant heat. It heats objects and people directly, not the air. No hot ceiling and cold floor. The whole room feels evenly warm. Medieval builders placed the heater in the center of the home with the mass forming one wall of a sleeping alcove. At night, you sleep with your back against warm stone. Some designs have baking ovens built into the structure or heated benches. In multi-room cabins, the heater is built as a shared wall between rooms, radiating heat in all directions. A brick flue in the attic sometimes includes a chamber for smoking food. And here is what modern homes miss. Thermal radiation works best in small, enclosed spaces. Medieval cabins are not open-plan spaces. Rooms are compact. Ceilings are low, often just 7 feet. This keeps warm, radiant surfaces close to people. Finnish researchers reconstruct and test a traditional log cabin with a masonry heater. A single 2-hour firing using about 30 pounds of wood maintains 65 degrees Fahrenheit for over 18 hours, even with the outside temperature at -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Total fuel consumption is 60 to 70% lower than conventional systems. The medieval system is not just more efficient, it is resilient. It does not depend on continuous fuel or electricity. If you cannot fire the stove for 3 days, the cabin stays above freezing. A modern home, uninhabitable in less than 24 hours. Section 4. The complete system. How it all works together. The medieval log cabin is not one clever trick. It is a complete integrated system where every element supports the others. The foundation uses stone piers, lifting the floor off the cold ground. The floor is thick planks, sometimes doubled, with moss or sawdust insulation underneath. This breaks the thermal bridge to earth. The massive log walls provide both insulation and thermal mass. The scribe-fit joinery blocks air infiltration. The sphagnum moss chinking flexes with seasonal movement while maintaining an airtight seal. Low ceilings and compact rooms keep warm air close to people. The central masonry heater stores and radiates heat for hours. But there is one more element. Thermal zoning. Medieval cabins are not kept at the same temperature everywhere. The main living area might be 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Sleeping areas might be 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Storage areas are even colder. This is intentional. You do not need the same warmth when asleep under heavy blankets as when awake and working. By allowing thermal gradients, they reduce total heat load. Modern homes try to keep every room at the same temperature, requiring enormous energy. No heat escapes without providing benefit. The chimney passes through upper floors before exiting, warming those areas. The cooking area is adjacent to the heater, using waste heat. Bread is baked in ovens built into the masonry mass. Small spaces behind and under the stove called zapisha and podpisha in Russian serve as warm, dry storage. Boots dry there. Clothes stay warm. These systems require knowledge to operate, but very little maintenance. The masonry heater needs cleaning once or twice yearly. Log walls need periodic inspection and rechinking. No filters, no motors, and no electronic controls are needed. A child can grasp the proper way to operate a masonry heater in just a single day. What's more, these structures only get better with time. Over the initial years, as the logs season completely in place, they become increasingly stable and seal even more tightly. The masonry heater develops tiny, almost invisible cracks that surprisingly enhance heat distribution. It's not uncommon for a 50-year-old cabin to be warmer and more efficient than a brand new one. This is the complete opposite of modern construction, where buildings start to deteriorate the moment they're finished. In 2004, a team from the University of Alaska built 2 identical small cabins. One was constructed using modern techniques, 2x6 framing with R19 insulation, a vapor barrier, drywall, and a propane furnace. The other was a traditional log cabin featuring 10-inch logs, scribe joinery, and a masonry heater. Both cabins were situated in Fairbanks, where winter temperatures frequently plummet to -40 degrees Fahrenheit. They then monitored both structures throughout an entire winter season. The modern cabin required constant furnace operation to maintain a temperature of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Daily propane consumption averaged 18 gallons. When the propane supply was shut off to simulate a power outage, the interior temperature plunged to 40 degrees Fahrenheit within 8 hours, eventually reaching the outside temperature within 24 hours. The log cabin, equipped with a masonry heater, was fired twice daily, consuming a total of about 35 pounds of wood. Interior temperatures fluctuated from 62 degrees Fahrenheit before the morning firing to 72 degrees Fahrenheit just an hour afterward. When the heater remained unfired for 3 consecutive days, the interior temperature only dropped to 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The thermal mass retained enough heat to prevent freezing for over 72 hours. The occupants of the log cabin consistently reported higher levels of comfort, even when the air temperature was sometimes lower, a testament to the effects of radiant heat. You simply feel warmer when surrounded by warm surfaces. So, you have the structure. Walls that store heat for 24 hours and a heater that only needs firing once a day. But medieval peasants understood that the structure was only one part of the equation. You also needed internal fuel, resources that sustained you, not just the building itself. They mastered one particular substance, something we often discard, and transformed it into 8 essential survival technologies: light, heat, waterproofing, medicine, hygiene, and preservation, all derived from animal fat. Here's how they did it. System 1. The high-calorie furnace. Let's begin with the most crucial aspect, generating body heat. In a world without central heating, your own body becomes the primary furnace. The modern solution is simply to adjust the thermostat, but their approach was to fuel the fire from within. The principle is remarkably clever. It's known as diet-induced thermogenesis. When you eat, your body expends energy to digest the food, and this process generates heat. Fats are the most calorie-dense food source available, providing 9 calories per gram compared to the 4 calories per gram from carbohydrates or protein. Therefore, a diet that strategically incorporates fat provides your body with a substantial amount of fuel to burn, raising your core temperature from the inside out. Medieval peasants understood this from first-hand experience gained through hardship. While grains like barley, oats, and rye constituted the bulk of their diet, fat was a vital supplement, particularly for those engaged in strenuous physical labor outdoors in freezing conditions. Historical records indicate that peasant men required around 2,900 calories per day. However, individuals involved in particularly demanding labor, such as loggers or stoneworkers, could consume 3,500 calories or more, rivaling the intake of modern professional athletes. The key event was the autumn slaughter, which historians refer to as the Martinmas slaughter, typically around November 11th. It was simply impossible to feed all the livestock throughout the winter when forage was scarce and expensive. So animals, especially pigs, were butchered, providing a massive influx of meat and, crucially, fat. This fat was rendered into lard and used for more than just cooking. They employed a technique called potting. Meat would be cooked, packed into earthenware pots, and then completely sealed with a thick layer of melted lard. This created an airtight barrier, preserving the calorie-dense meat for months without the need for refrigeration. Imagine a perpetual stew simmering over the fire for weeks, with whatever ingredients were available added: root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, grains, and a generous scoop of that preserved fatty meat. Every spoonful was like another log on the internal fire, literally warming you from the inside. This wasn't about gluttony or indulgence. It was a carefully calculated survival strategy, turning their own bodies into the primary source of warmth. When you understand that a single gram of fat provides more than twice the energy of protein or carbs, you realize these people weren't primitive. They were operating a highly optimized biological heating system. System 2. The tallow lamp, a personal sun. Picture this. It's the dead of winter, and the sun sets at 4 p.m. You're facing 16 hours of darkness in a small, drafty hut. The battle against the cold transforms into a battle against the dark. For a peasant family, light was far more than a mere convenience. It was safety, comfort, and psychological survival. And again, the solution came from animal fat. The primary light source for the common person wasn't the clean-burning beeswax candles of the wealthy, which were expensive and reserved for churches and nobility. Instead, it was the tallow candle, or the even simpler rushlight. Tallow is the hard fat rendered from cattle or sheep, specifically from around the kidneys and organs. To make candles, They would melt the tallow and repeatedly dip a wick, usually made from twisted hemp or flax, into it, allowing each layer to cool and build up. Each dip added thickness until a functional candle was formed. For the poorest households, there was the rush light. They would gather rushes from nearby wetlands, peel them carefully to expose the soft pith inside, and soak them in melted fat. The saturated rush served as both the fuel and the wick. It was placed at an angle in a simple metal holder, lit at the end, and would burn slowly, emitting a small but steady flame. But here's the forgotten ingenuity. These weren't just lights. They were miniature heat sources. Now, don't get me wrong, a single tallow candle isn't going to heat an entire room, but think of it as a tiny personal fireplace. The radiant heat from a candle flame held close is just enough to warm your frozen fingers while you're mending clothes or repairing a tool after dark. In a space where the only other heat source is a central fire pit constantly battling drafts, these small, portable flames were vital satellites of warmth scattered throughout the living space. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Tallow candles were notoriously smelly, emitting an odor of cooked meat and smoke, and they produced a lot of soot that would coat walls and lungs alike. But the trade-off was worth it. That small flame served as a psychological anchor in the oppressive darkness, a tiny sun pushing back the night and providing just enough heat to make life bearable after sunset. Modern preppers spend hundreds on LED lanterns and batteries. Medieval peasants had a renewable light and heat source that cost them nothing but time and the byproduct of an animal they'd already butchered for food. System 3. The grease shield. In any long-term survival situation, you quickly learn a harsh truth: being wet is often more dangerous than being cold. Damp clothes draw heat from your body at an alarming rate, up to 25 times faster than dry clothes. Your core temperature can drop into hypothermia range in mere minutes, not hours. The medieval peasant understood this intimately. Their solution was to create a personal, wearable shield against moisture. The most common and critical application was on their footwear. Peasant shoes were simple leather, often just a single piece of cowhide shaped and stitched, known as turn shoes. These soaked through rapidly in wet snow or when trudging through muddy fields. To combat this, they employed a technique we'd recognize today as dubbing. The word comes from dubbing, the act of dressing leather. They would take rendered animal fat, sometimes mixed with beeswax if they could afford it, and rub it deeply into the leather, often warming both the fat and the boots by the fire to help the grease penetrate the fibers. The fat saturated the material at a molecular level, filling the tiny spaces between the leather fibers and rendering it water repellent. Historical recipes from the 1600s describe mixing mutton tallow with pine rosin in specific ratios for maximum waterproofing. Was it perfect? No, it was sticky, it attracted dirt and debris, and it had to be reapplied regularly, especially after heavy use.
But it kept their feet dry.
And in a world where frostbite could mean losing toes, a foot, or even your life from infection, this was a critical survival technology. While we lack extensive written documentation, it's highly likely they extended this logic to their own skin. Without modern lotions, a thin layer of lard rubbed onto your hands and face would serve as a crude but effective barrier against windburn and chapping during long hours of outdoor work in sub-zero temperatures. Think of it as a medieval barrier cream. The fat created a protective layer that locked in your skin's natural moisture and shielded you from the drying effects of winter wind. This system highlights a core principle of survival: pragmatism over comfort. Was it pleasant to wear greased-up boots or have a film of lard on your face? Probably not by our standards, but it worked. Staying dry was half the battle against winter, and animal fat was the ammunition. If you're finding value in this deep dive into forgotten survival wisdom, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps more people discover these techniques that could save their lives one day. Thank you. System 4. The Fat Medicine Cabinet. Beyond just surviving the cold, animal fat served another crucial role. It was their pharmacy. Medieval healers understood something that modern medicine is only now rediscovering through scientific research. Fat is one of the most effective delivery systems for medicine. The reason lies in biochemistry. Many healing compounds found in plants are fat-soluble, not water-soluble. This means they require a fatty base to be absorbed effectively through the skin. Medieval healers, working through trial and error over generations, figured this out empirically. They would take rendered lard or tallow and infuse it with healing herbs, camphor for wounds and broken bones, chamomile for inflammation, calendula for infections and skin conditions. The process was simple, but required knowledge. The fat was heated gently, then dried or fresh herbs were added and allowed to steep for hours. Finally, the plant material was strained out, leaving behind a medicated salve. These weren't just folk remedies with placebo effects. Modern analysis of traditional fat-based salves shows they were genuinely effective. The fat base served multiple functions. It acted as a carrier, allowing the medicinal compounds to penetrate deep into tissue. It created a protective barrier over wounds, keeping out dirt and bacteria while locking in moisture that promoted healing. And the fat itself had anti-inflammatory properties. If you cut your hand splitting wood in sub-zero temperatures, the risk wasn't just the wound itself. It was infection in an era before antibiotics. It was the wound not healing because cold restricts blood flow to extremities. A thick application of herbal tallow salve could mean the difference between healing cleanly in 2 weeks and losing fingers to gangrene. The sophisticated part was that they had different fat bases for different purposes. Lard from pigs was softer and absorbed quickly, making it ideal for facial applications. Beef tallow was harder and created a more durable barrier, better for hands and feet that needed protection during work. Goose fat was prized for respiratory issues and rubbed on the chest to ease breathing. This was pharmaceutical technology using the resources at hand. No patents, no prescriptions, just accumulated knowledge passed down through generations of survival. System 5. The soap revolution. Here's something that might surprise you, especially if you've seen medieval peasants portrayed in movies. They weren't as filthy as Hollywood wants you to believe. And animal fat was their secret weapon for staying clean, which in turn was critical for preventing disease and infection during brutal winters when your immune system was already stressed. They discovered, probably by accident initially, that mixing rendered tallow with lye created from wood ash produced something remarkable: soap. The chemistry is called saponification. When fat molecules react with the alkaline lye, they break down and reform into soap molecules, which have the unique ability to bind to both water and oils, allowing you to rinse away dirt and grease. The process was labor-intensive and required real skill. Wood ashes were collected from fires over weeks. The best came from hardwoods like oak or beech. These ashes were placed in a barrel or wooden hopper lined with straw as a filter. Boiling water was poured through the ashes, and as it dripped through, it leached out potassium hydroxide, creating lye. The strength of this lye was tested by floating an egg in it. If the egg floated with about the size of a small coin visible above the surface, the lye was ready. Too strong, and it would burn your skin. Too weak, and it wouldn't make soap. This lye was then combined with melted tallow in large pots and boiled for 6 to 8 hours, constantly stirred. You'd know the soap was ready when it became thick and formed long bubbles when simmering. They would test samples on small plates, cutting them with sticks. If the cuts sealed back together, the soap had saponified properly. The result was a dark, soft soap called black soap because of the color from the wood ash. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't scented with lavender like modern soap, but it worked. It could tackle everything from greasy wool that needed cleaning before weaving to washing bodies and preventing the buildup of grime that could lead to skin infections. In a time when staying clean wasn't just about social acceptability, but about preventing disease, this tallow-based soap was a survival tool disguised as a hygiene product. The wealthier classes had access to white soap made with better ingredients, but even the poorest peasant could make functional soap from materials they already had. Think about the ingenuity here. They took 2 waste products, ash from fires they'd burn anyway and fat from butchered animals, and through knowledge of chemistry they didn't have words for yet, they created a cleaning agent that kept them healthy through winter's worst. System 6. Sealing the shelter. A peasant's wattle and daub hut was a constant battle against drafts. The structure was simple: a wooden frame filled with woven branches, wattle, and plastered with a mixture of clay, dung, and straw, daub. Every crack, every gap was a place for precious heat to escape and bitter cold to invade. So their survival system extended from protecting their bodies to fortifying their homes. Now, their primary insulation wasn't fat itself, but other animal byproducts. After the autumn slaughter, animal hides that weren't turned into leather for clothes or shoes were stretched and used as heavy curtains. These were hung over drafty doorways or the small window openings, acting like thick wind-blocking barriers. A well-placed hide curtain could reduce heat loss through a doorway by more than half. But the fat still played a clever and practical role. The daub plaster, that mixture of clay and straw, would crack as it dried out and weathered through seasonal changes. These cracks were more than cosmetic problems, they were thermal leaks. While we don't have extensive written documentation, it's highly plausible, based on what we know of their resourcefulness, that peasants created a primitive caulk by working animal fat into soft clay or mixing it with ash to create a pliable paste. The fat would have served multiple functions in this mixture. Its sticky, adhesive quality would help it cling to the cracks. Its water-resistant properties would prevent moisture from seeping through and causing more damage. And as it hardened, it would create a flexible seal that could withstand some expansion and contraction from temperature changes. Archaeological evidence from preserved medieval structures shows repairs in daub that have unusual compositions, suggesting various experimental mixtures. The principle makes perfect sense. If fat waterproofs leather and preserves food, why wouldn't you use it to seal your home? It was this waste not want not philosophy that defined their existence. The bloody, messy process of butchering an animal, something that happened once or twice a year, was transformed into a cascade of life-saving resources that lasted months. The fat, which we might see today as a greasy byproduct to be discarded, was elevated to a critical, multi-purpose tool. It was food, fuel for light, waterproofing for boots and possibly skin, medicine, soap, and a component of shelter maintenance. Every part of the animal was used. Nothing was wasted, because waste meant death. System 7. The ultimate preservation technology. Remember that autumn slaughter I mentioned? The fat from those animals became something even more impressive than just cooking fuel or candle material. It became essentially a time machine for food preservation. By mixing dried, thoroughly pounded meat with rendered fat in a careful ratio, approximately 1:1 by weight, medieval and early modern people in various cultures created what military researchers would later call the ultimate survival food. The fat served as a complete barrier against oxygen and moisture, the two things that cause food to spoil. The process required precision. First, meat was cut into thin strips and dried until completely brittle, either in the sun, over a slow fire, or in the cold, dry air of winter itself. This removed virtually all moisture. The dried meat was then pounded, sometimes for hours, until it became almost powder-like in consistency. This increased the surface area, allowing the fat to coat every particle. Melted tallow was then mixed in while still warm, but not hot enough to cook the meat further. The ratio was critical. Too little fat, and air pockets remained where bacteria could grow. Too much fat, and the mixture became too soft, and rancid fats could separate. When done correctly and packed into sealed containers, this fat-preserved meat could remain edible for years, even decades. Modern military studies conducted in the 1960s found that people could survive for extended periods on surprisingly small amounts of this fat-meat combination, around 1,000 calories worth during starvation conditions. The fat provided concentrated energy, while the protein maintained muscle mass. During the hardest months of winter, from January through March, when stored vegetables were running low and no fresh food was available, this fat-preserved meat was often the difference between starvation and survival. A family might have 50 or more pounds of this mixture stored away, representing thousands of calories that wouldn't spoil no matter how long or cold the winter became. Think about what this represents. Without electricity, without canning, without freeze-drying, they had a shelf-stable protein source that could outlast any modern MRE. And the key ingredient was the one thing we throw away: pure animal fat. System 8. The tool protector. In medieval winter, your tools were your lifeline. There were no hardware stores, no Amazon deliveries, no way to quickly replace a broken or damaged tool. A broken axe meant you couldn't split firewood, which meant you couldn't heat your home. A rusted plow meant you couldn't prepare fields in spring, which meant no crops, which meant starvation. Tool maintenance wasn't a hobby. It was life or death serious. And once again, animal fat provided the solution. They would coat their metal tools, axes, saws, knives, farm implements, with a thin layer of tallow. This wasn't a casual wipe down. It was a deliberate preservation technique. The process was simple. After using a tool, especially if it had gotten wet, they would warm it slightly by the fire to drive off any moisture. Then they would rub tallow over every metal surface, working it into any joints or moving parts. The fat created a hydrophobic barrier, a protective shield against moisture and oxygen, the two elements that cause rust. In the humid, wet conditions of a medieval dwelling, where water vapor from cooking, breathing, and damp clothes constantly filled the air, unprotected metal would rust within days. But there's more. In freezing conditions, metal becomes brittle. It can crack or shatter under stress. The thin film of fat coating the metal provided a tiny amount of insulation and, more importantly, reduced the direct impact of extreme temperature changes. A tool stored near the fire wouldn't experience quite as violent a thermal shock when taken outside into minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit air if it had a protective fat layer. Historical records also show that tallow was used for lubricating moving parts, anything with a hinge, a slide, or metal-on-metal contact. The fat reduced friction and wear, extending the tool's working life by years. Some craftsmen took this further, mixing tallow with other substances. Blacksmiths would create special protective compounds by melting tallow with beeswax for a harder finish or mixing it with fine ash to create a mildly abrasive paste for cleaning before applying a pure fat layer. The sophistication here is easy to miss. They were practicing preventive maintenance using material science principles they couldn't articulate but understood through generational experience. That thin film of animal fat represented the difference between having functional tools and facing winter helpless. So there you have it, 8 interconnected systems that reveal how medieval peasants transformed animal fat, something we literally throw away, into a complete survival infrastructure covering heating, lighting, waterproofing, medicine, hygiene, food preservation, and tool maintenance. This wasn't primitive desperation. This was sophisticated systems, thinking refined over generations, proving that nature provides everything we need if we're clever enough to recognize it. Today, we've traded this resilience for fragile convenience, becoming dependent on supply chains and electricity for survival. But here's my challenge to you. Go to your local butcher this week, get some beef fat trimmings for free or nearly free, render a small batch, and make just one tallow candle. Light it on a dark evening, feel the heat it gives off, and you'll understand in that moment what medieval peasants knew instinctively, that forgotten wisdom isn't just historical trivia, it's life-saving knowledge we abandoned too soon. Which of these 8 systems surprised you most? And are you actually going to try this? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, where we continue uncovering the forgotten wisdom of the past. Wisdom of the past. Wisdom of